today, a special treat. Professor Moshe Cohen-Eliya. Professor Moshe Cohen-Eliya. I want you to remember that name and remember that we brought him here because I have a funny feeling he's going to become very special in the land of Israel with the work that he is presently doing. So remember that name, Moshe Cohen-Eliya. He is one of Israel's leading constitutional thinkers and civic leaders, combining deep academic expertise with hands-on involvement in democratic reform, civil rights legislation, and institutional renewal. For over 2 decades, he's worked at the intersection of law, public policy, and society, helping shape Israel's constitutional development, which is a hint as to what he's going to be doing, and while actively engaging in its most critical democratic challenges, which are very large challenges in Israel at the present time. He played a formative role in advancing civil rights in Israel. He was also involved in the legal processes surrounding Israel's first Supreme Court ruling invalidating legislation for violating basic law. It's such a complicated situation that I am glad he is here to discuss with us these issues, but especially the issue of the power of the Israeli Supreme Court, which is very different from our Supreme Court. Would you please welcome Professor Moshe Cohen-Eliya.
Thank you very much, Alan. It's a real pleasure to be here in this wonderful town, to see this wonderful community, and to express some sort of hope mixed with anxiety about what is going on in Israel today, the constitutional crisis. And I want to tackle this issue from a different angle, from the angle of political polarization. Currently, I'm co-writing a book named Polarization and Supreme Courts, which I co-authored with Professor Prof. It's forthcoming in the coming 2 months in Cambridge University Press, and it expresses a process that cuts across almost every nation on the globe. And what we see across the globe is a process in which, because ideology has turned out to be something so essential to us, we try to capture institutions. And one of the institutions that has been captured is typically the court. You see it in America, you see it in Hungary, you see it in Poland, and of course you see it in Israel. And this problem is not only about courts, it's about many institutions that have changed their original meaning. Army is supposed to win battles. Suddenly it has become a bit more wokish, and you can see some ideas of social justice entering into an institution whose purpose was different. Also, the same with the court, the same with the academia. The purpose of the academia is to enrich human knowledge. It has become a bastion of radical left in many academic institutions. You see it in America, you also can see it in Israel. So I'm going to start the talk with, one second, why doesn't it work? The clicker? Sure. Okay, look at this picture. There's a guy there who is puzzled, is embarrassed. He has been sent by the director of the Supreme Court Division at the Attorney General in 1993 to to hear a court ruling pertaining precedent that the Israeli Supreme Court has just launched, a precedent ruling that the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, has to fire a minister, in this case Aryeh Deri, because the Attorney General has decided to indict him. This is an hyper-activist decision. No similar decision exists in any other jurisdiction across the globe. And this guy is me. I was interning at this time with the Supreme Court Division. I had much more hair than today, as you can see. And I must say that that was my first day in the internship, and I was quite puzzled and excited, and I didn't realize how this decision actually has turned the court, instead of an institution that tries to lower the stakes of politics, reach compromise. The court today is at the center of the political polarization in Israel. It's basically about the court power, even more than issue pertaining to national security. So let's start to understand the topic of political polarization. It's a topic that many Americans are very aware of, and I'll compare the situation in America with the situation in Israel. Look at this chart. You can see here a graph showing the level of political polarization in different continents across the globe. And what is clearly seen from this chart is that as of the 1990s, we see almost everywhere a sharp increase in the level of political polarization. And what is unique about this kind of political polarization, it's not only a difference in ideology. There's not much differences today than there used to be in the past. The difference is that we are now encountering a different kind of political polarization, which is much more emotional. It pertains to an even level of hate that we feel towards people belonging to the different political camp. And this has happened because today ideology has turned out to be, in a sense, also part of our identity. And when someone presents an argument against my belief, he doesn't only say that I'm wrong, he actually says that I'm illegitimate. Basically, he attacks me. This is how people conceive the difference in political ideology. It's a personal attack. It's not only bringing argument to the floor. So, what has turned, or how come ideology has turned out to be our identity? Well, in this picture, you see a very famous couple. In the case of Loving versus Virginia, as you may well know, until 1968, there was a law in Virginia banning interracial marriages, and the American Supreme Court has struck down this final and last case or law that allow racial segregation and racial discrimination in America. What has happened, and which is fascinating, if you ask in the 1960s people, would you agree that your son or daughter marry someone belonging to the African American community, 95% would disagree. And when people were asked, are you willing that your son and daughter get married to a person belonging to the other ideological political camp, only 4% disapproved. Do you know what the situation today is? 95% have no problem that their son or daughter get married to African American, and almost 50% disapprove inter-ideological marriages. So what actually happens is basically a sense that, well, today it's politically incorrect to be racist. However, it is definitely politically correct to attack people belonging to the other political camp. Actually, it's legitimate. It's about ideology. We quarrel about ideology. So instead, because we tend to be tribal, it's a way for humans to survive. We belong, we exist through tribes. So once we cannot belong to a race, a tribe, then we create a different kind of tribe, an ideological tribe. And this has very substantial effects. For example, in terms of residents, as you may well know, California is losing some of its electorate and some of its residents to Texas and to Florida, because people want to live next to people who share similar ideology, because it's part of their identity. A very interesting research has tried to measure the length of Thanksgiving dinner during the 2016 election, which was very polarizing election, Hillary Clinton versus Trump. And the results were fascinating. When to the table people belonging to different political camps sat, this dinner was shortened by between 30 to 50 minutes, because people hate each other, they cannot wait for the dinner to end. So it also affects interpersonal relationship. It's not only about politics, it also affects human relationships. So the question that comes in mind is, why are we experiencing this kind of phenomenon? Why there is such an increase in political polarization, and why is it more about emotion than about real ideological differences? One explanation relates to the waning effect of the Second World War. As you will soon see, the Second World War, post-World War II, we saw a very low level of political polarization. We won the Nazis, we felt united, and the level of political polarization were relatively low. But as years passed, the effect of this traumatic event also waned. Now look at this chart. It has been produced by a very famous economic called Piketty, and it measures the income inequality in the United States. As you can see, the level of inequality in America today are about the same as at the end of the 19th century, which was the hyper-capitalist period of time. Look again, after the Second World War, America was very egalitarian. There was a very strong middle class level, but as time has passed, now we encounter someone like Elon Musk, who has passed $1 trillion. Yeah, it's less now than $1 trillion, I think. But the level of inequality have effect because people feel angry, and this creates a clash between the elites that benefit from globalization and the people that suffer from globalization. There's a very interesting book called The Road to Somewhere that distinguishes between the anywheres, the globalists, someone like me, who can take his USB and speak anywhere across the globe, and people who are tied to the land, the somewheres versus the anywhere. And this is the essential clash that we are experiencing, not only in America, but also in Europe. For example, in Great Britain, the vote on the Brexit, it manifested a very sharp distinction between people who lived in London, who resisted the Brexit, and people who live in the periphery, who voted overwhelmingly for the Brexit. And of course, immigration. when nation change, when mass immigration comes from Mexico or comes from North Africa to Europe, this creates anxiety about the identity of the nation and thus heightening the level of political polarization. And finally, what we call the echo chamber effect of the social media. You know, in order for your voice to be heard, we need to be much more polarizing. We need to raise or trigger much more anger. And this, of course, heighten the level of political polarization. Okay, so we spoke about political polarization as a general phenomenon. Now, let's see what is going on in the US. This chart shows the level of political polarization within Congress itself. It measures the number of cases in which there was a bipartisan vote in Congress. Again, you can see the level of political polarization today is even higher than the period that was around the Civil War in the 19th century. It's the highest ever been. The Congress votes almost automatically in a partisan way. And add to that the rise of the different kind of media, the demise of the legacy media, and the rise of Fox News, the social media. You hear different voices, people live in different bubbles, and this creates tension between the different social groups. In America, it started in the 1990s with the guerrilla tactic that Newt Gingrich employed. By the way, one of the tactics that he employed, he approached the member of Congress from the Republican Party and told them, you don't have to live in DC. Let your family stay at your home states. Come to DC for 3 days and then go back. What did Newt Gingrich try to achieve by giving this advice? Previously, there were very close relationship between congressmen from the different political parties. They used to meet for dinner, for Saturdays, and once he cut that off, this allows him to use much more aggressive, polarizing tactics. And of course, in America, the racial issue always triggers. According to the demography, in 2048, the whites are going to be minority in the United States. And this creates tension, this creates anxiety about a shifting hegemony and about controlling this state. And of course, the most polarizing issue, I think, is identity politics and the rise of woke ideology. You see it very clearly. Every research tries to measure the level of getting to the extreme, shows that while in the right wing, the level of extremeness have remained the same, what has actually changed is the left. The left has become much more radical. I can confess that I'm a liberal, and I was a lawyer for the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, and I was even a fellow of the New Israel Fund in the 1990s. And what I realized is that I remain a liberal while my fellows during the last 30 years have become woke and have become much more extreme. And they call me conservative, and I'm always telling them, I'm at the same place. You have become extremist. That's the main problem. So for that reason, I wrote a book with Professor Ido Porat, Courts and Polarization. And what we actually see when we look at so many jurisdictions is that no one really believes in law. We know now that it's a bluff. And we don't really care much about what the constitutions say. We basically care much more about who are the judges. It's not the what question, but rather the who question. So when Ronald Reagan once said, personnel is policy, he put the finger on the right spot. Because it's basically about people, people, people in the right places. So it's very funny to mention that in Israel, one of the members of the Knesset from the left has mentioned that the Attorney General, Gali Baharav Miara, she said, Baharav Miara is the law. She is the law. Yitzhak Amit, the president of the Israel Supreme Court, is the law. You know, once Montesquieu has said that judges are la bouche de la loi, the mouth of the law. And he basically meant that judges should only say what the law is, what the legislator meant. But now, in Israel, but not only in Israel, this word or this saying has been taken literally. They are the law. So, if you look at the constitutional crisis in Israel, there's nothing about violation of human rights. It's only about nomination. Who is going to be the head of the Shabbat? Who is going to be the head of the Mossad? Who are the judges? Who are going to be the Attorney General? It's about the who people. So, what does it mean to have a law when people are the law? So, let's see how this affects the United States. So, the American Supreme Court, you are familiar, I assume, with Seinfeld? Yeah? There was a period of, I think one of the episodes of Seinfeld, Elaine dated a Catholic guy who she was very much attracted to him, but she was afraid that he is anti-abortion. So Jerry told her, well, ask him. But she didn't want to ask him. And eventually she asked him. And she told him, well, you know, I have a friend who was raped and she's thinking about doing an abortion. And what do you think? And he said, one day we'll have the 5th judge on the Supreme Court to change that law. So what the Republican actually did after Roe versus Wade, they went into the long march to change the Supreme Court, and eventually, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, they succeeded, and Roe v. Wade was overruled in Dobbs. So what we saw, again, it's about capturing the institution in order to change the policies. Now, this very nice couple are Justice Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, very opposing side of the political and intellectual camp on the American Supreme Court. When they were elected, there was a bipartisan support for voting for each of them. Republican voted for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and you have Democrat voting for Scalia. By the way, you see them in India, they were very good friends, although they were very opposing intellectually. Well, if we go back to recent years, we know what is going on today. The vote about nominating judges to the Supreme Court are almost totally partisan. And in the case of Kavanaugh, we saw how emotional and how extreme it can get. Now look at the effect of that. When the American Supreme Court overruled Roe versus Wade, you see a sharp decline in the level of confidence of Democrats in the American Supreme Court. It reached a level of only 13% of Democrats having confidence in the American Supreme Court, with Republican 39. That's also very low, okay? This is a kind of mirror to what is going on in Israel. Because once one camp captures the court, the other camp does not have confidence in that institution. This is the Israeli Supreme Court. It's very close to the Israeli Knesset. And there's a nice trail that goes from the Knesset to the court. And this trail has been preoccupied by the opposition members. When they lose in the Knesset, they go to the Israeli Supreme Court, okay? Because the Israeli Supreme Court is manifested and led by the tradition of Aharon Barak. And Aharon Barak, as you know, he was nominated in 1979 to the Israeli Supreme Court by Menachem Begin after helping drafting the Camp David Accord and reaching a peace agreement with Egypt. And Begin was very impressed by the skills of Aharon Barak, and he nominated him to the court, and Barak started to shift so much power from the Knesset and from the government, the elected institutions, into the Supreme Court. And many sociologists present an account for why did this happen and what purpose that it served. And the answer is the following. In 1977, the Labour Party for the first time lost the election. So the hegemony that formed Israel, the Mapai, the Likud, the Labour Party, were fearful. So they started to shift power from elected institutions, not only to the Israeli Supreme Court. Also, a few days before the new government of Begin was formed, Rabin government, just a few days, reached a decision, number 666, that was reached on the 6th of June, 77, which granted autonomy to public universities in allocation of resources. They were saying, well, we need to protect ourselves. This is where our fellows sit, okay? So they transferred power to institutions that they control. And in 2023, we had an attempt which totally failed by this government, the right-wing government, to reform the legal system. I have criticism about the way that this attempt to reform was conducted. It was not conducted in the proper way. That there is a lot of truth in the attempt to restrain the Israeli Supreme Court. The Israeli Supreme Court is now the sovereign of Israel. There is a very important professor called Ran Hirschel. He is an expert in comparative constitutional law. He was an intern of Aharon Barak, and he has written a very important book in 2004 in Harvard University Press called Toward Juristocracy. And he's saying that the idea to use the term juristocracy came when he saw what Aharon Barak was doing. Aharon Barak was actually reshaping and changing the foundation of the regime of Israel. Israel was a parliamentary democracy like Great Britain, with no constitution. What Barak did, it changed the Israeli regime from a parliamentary democracy into a constitutional democracy. However, since then, Israel is no longer a constitutional democracy. It's not a democracy anymore. Because what the Supreme Court has done in 2024, in the midst of the terrible war, just after September 11, the court, in a very slim majority of 8-7, struck down a constitutional amendment relating to a very marginal provision of the reasonableness cause of action that limits the power of the court, and it struck it down, a constitutional amendment without any explicit authorization. So the court can do everything. And since then, we are exhibiting hyperactivism from especially Chief Justice Isaac Amit, who has placed the officials above those that we elect. He changed the system. So the sovereign today is the judge and not the people. This is why it's a juristocracy and not a democratia. We see it also in the sense that today, actually yesterday, the government has declared that the Israeli Supreme Court actually acted against the law. And the government is correct. Isaac Amit is acting against the law. There are very explicit provisions in the law that he actually disregards, because he conceived the situation today as an idea of self-defending Supreme Court, like self-defending democracy or militant democracy. The court is under attack, and it is his role to protect the court, even if it contradicts what the law says. So the law does not matter anymore. There's a Nazi jurist called Carl Schmitt, and he said that there's a notion called a state of exception. And in a state of exception, there is no law. In the state of exception, it's a power struggle between enemy and friend. This is how Amit conceived the situation today. And this leads us to a constitutional crisis. Yesterday, the court has ruled that if a public official disobeys the court ruling and obeys the government, he will not be immune, and it is possible to bring a civil lawsuit against him, and the court would rule against him. So they try to intimidate the official to obey the court and not to obey the government. Yitzhak David Zini, the head of the General Secret Service, Shabak, it was a huge struggle to nominate him. And it's the full discretion of the government to nominate, like the FBI. Who nominates the head of the FBI? The president, of course. And in Israel, it's so obvious that it's full discretion of the government under the advice of the prime minister to nominate the head of the Shabak. And you had the most, I would use much cautious word, okay? Ronen Bar is one of the chief responsible for October the 7th. He did not wake up prime minister. And he did not want to resign, even a year after October the 7th. And it was a lot of petition to the Supreme Court, and they tried to initiate a criminal investigation against the prime minister so they can say that he's now in a conflict of interest and he cannot fire Ronen Bar. Amazing. So many petitions reaching the Supreme Court. Months have passed until, by coincidence, the court allowed that. There was some conservative judges that allowed that. And now, after they nominated David Zini, again, many petitions, it was also half a 6 months wait. And now, again, every word he's saying that he's obeying the government, he's not obeying the court. court. This is a very dramatic moment in the history of Israel. It's a dramatic clash between institutions, and I can tell you, as someone who was deeply involved in an attempt to reach a constitutional compromise, 3 weeks after the election, I saw that there is a problem, and I came from the left. I approached a think tank from the right called Cohen-Eliya, who actually was the orchestra behind the reform. And we had deliberation between Yariv Levin, the Minister of Justice, and people from the political parties of the opposition. And I saw in my own eyes who blocked an attempt to reach an agreement. The court, the academia, brothers in arms, those who called for the collapse of the army, and we had October 7th. There is a very extreme element in the Israeli left. It's not really left in terms of ideology. It's more about power struggle and who controls the state of Israel. I can tell you that a few weeks after the election, I met friends of ours who live in Zichron Yaakov. It's a very nice town on the Carmel Mountain, and they have a fantastic view on the sea, on the Mediterranean. And they approached me and asked me, Moshe, are they going to take our homes? That's the fear. That's the existential fear. So, again, why doesn't it move? It doesn't shift. Okay. It doesn't move again. Okay. I want to say something about the Netanyahu trial and about political polarization, how to reduce it, and then we'll move to Q&A with Alan. Netanyahu trial is the most important trial in the history of Israel after the Eichmann trial. And it has been conducted for many years, and Netanyahu was a witness in this case for 93 days. In the midst of this terrible war, he needed to appear in court for 3 times a week, 8 hours a day, for nonsense. The whole purpose or the whole issue of this case was a bribery charge. A week ago, the court said quite explicitly, there is no bribery charge anymore. What has left is a few cigars and champagne that he got from a friend. Well, it's not okay, but this is not something you put a state in a lunatic situation of 5 consecutive cases of election and boycotting the right wing because of the trial. It's crazy. This is why Netanyahu petitioned for pardon. But so far, the president of Israel is afraid to give pardon because of the left. He's part of this group. And the Attorney General very much is against that. The whole purpose of this case, and I must say that at the beginning, I had confidence in the Plakitud, in the prosecution. But as I dwelled into the evidence, I saw that there's almost no case there. Amazing. Now people are so furious and they want to prosecute the Attorney General that decided to indict Prime Minister Netanyahu. So this is a very polarizing case that divides Israel into two distinct camps. So let's say something hopeful to the end, okay? Because I think I made you quite impressed, unfortunately, and that's not my purpose. This is not something to be happy about, okay? Noah Argamani, October 7th. By the way, the Nova Festival, my daughter, she always go to this kind of parties, and I was so terrified that she was there. And luckily, she was in Greece, not in the Nova. But Noah Argamani, she looks very much like my daughter. She was kidnapped in this terrible event. And what we see usually after traumatic events, it's not only October the 7th, it's also September 11th. When such a trauma exists, the level of political polarization is usually reduced. Because when you have a common enemy, the distinction between the different camps seems marginal, not as important. In America, the chances of reducing political polarization are very slim because of the political system that is based on two political parties. However, in Israel, the system is built on proportional representation, which sometimes allows for a unified government to be formed. And as we see from the data, when unified governments are formed, the level of political polarization is reduced. And as you may well know, Prime Minister Netanyahu 2 weeks ago said clearly that he means to establish a wide government and to invite also parties from the moderate left or centric opposition to join the government. I think this is a very sensible idea, and it could lead to a constitutional compromise and to solving the problem in Israel. One last thing, we have time? Okay. I want to relate to the media in Israel. Okay. You know, like in America, we once had legacy media that we believed it was objective. And once you have Fox News, then you realize that there are other perspectives. What we have in Israel is the decline of the old legacy media of Israel, which you see here, and the rise of a new channel called Channel 14. It's a channel which is right-wing, like similar to Fox News, but more religious, okay, tends to be more religious. And by the way, I was invited to participate in one of the most popular talk show called The Patriot. You can see me sitting there as the lefty in The Patriot. I was sitting on the chair of the person who comes from the left. Why am I bringing this picture? I'm an open-minded person. So when I sit there and I bring argument and the other side present counter-argument and I say, well, they're right. I can tell you that before I went to Channel 14, I met someone very important of the old hegemony, which I was totally part of. From the juristocracy, I came from the juristocracy, from the elite. And I told him, well, I'm thinking of going to Channel 14 because I'm writing a book about political polarization, and I want to see if we can reduce political polarization by engaging in dialogue with the other side. And he thought and thought and thought and thought and said, okay, go, but be careful that it won't be contagious to you. So it won't be stuck to you, Channel 14. And he was right. What has happened is that Channel 14 is now on my face And wherever I go on the street, people who watch Channel 14 recognize me. And I must say, I had a very good experience there. I don't agree with everything they do. I don't agree with everything they say. Sometimes they are too radical for me. I'm a moderate liberal. But I feel that there are good people there. And once you engage in dialogue with the other side, that's the best way to reduce political polarization. And I really hope that after the coming election, a white government would be formed in Israel, and Isaac Amit is supposed to step down of the Supreme Court in 2 years, and Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara within a year and a half. I hope that within 2 years, once they step down, a new constitution would be formed, and when Ben-Gurion, he read the Declaration of Independence, and the Declaration of Independence states quite clearly that Israel should adopt a constitution no later than October 1st, 1948. But Ben-Gurion did not want politician en robe, politician in robes. He did not want judges to intervene in his policy, so there was no constitution. I think we have now reached the point that a constitution is needed. However, judges who hold political power, like in the US, like in almost every country in the Western world, judges should be nominated by politicians. I support a model like in Germany, in which a constitutional court is established there, and judges are being elected by 2/3 of the German Bundestag, the German parliament. I think this model also fits Israel. It requires compromise. It's not easy, but I think this is the way to move on to reduce the level of internal tension and to focus on the great promise that Israeli talent has to offer to the world. I can say that Israel is now richer than the Emirates, it's richer than Qatar, it's even richer than Germany. Amazing. Israel has turned out to be not only a military superpower, regional superpower, but also economic one, and it can also turn out to be a cultural regional superpower. There are tensions now between Trump and Netanyahu, but I trust Netanyahu to maneuver. He has managed to reduce this tension. A new MOU for a peace agreement with Lebanon has been signed. That's a very good move. Let's hope that at least after midterms election, we'll also solve the Iran problem. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There's a lot more to discuss, and I'm going to spend some time interviewing Professor Moshe Cohen-Eliya. First of all, I know we talk about the right and the left. We talk about it in this country, we talk about it in Israel. I think I've mentioned to you once before that when my wife and I visit Israel with or without our family, I get such a wonderful feeling being there. And 2 weeks later, when we're getting on the plane to leave, I'm so pissed off because of this kind of polarization that can destroy a country, really, truly. So I get very emotional about that part. Speaking about that, the first thing I want to ask Professor Cohen-Eliya, please describe the left and the right in Israel. So instead of saying the left and the right, our listeners here understand what's involved with the right, what's involved in the left. And before you answer that, I want to say it's similar in this country. I'm a liberal. He's a liberal. in the old sense of being liberal. We were in the center. But what's happened is the left has moved so far to the left that I almost fell over, so far to the left that the center is the new right. And you know, you get embarrassed to say I'm a right-winger, or even in Israel, they'll call you a right-winger like you're a warlord. The whole system has moved, which left us from the middle winding up being still there, but now it's the right. So please explain briefly, what's the left, what's the right in Israel?
Here? Okay. Let's first start with numbers, okay? People were asked to define themselves. Are you right-winger, left-winger, or centric? Only 12% of the Jewish population define themselves as leftists. 12%. Self-definition, okay? And right-wing is about 70% of the population. Among youngsters, only 5% define themselves as leftists. There are no leftists in Israel. It's amazing. Okay, so the question is very relevant because, so what is the left? The left today, in some way, it duplicates what is going on in America. It's the liberal elites, the globalist elites, working together with racial and sexual minorities that feel threatened from the right. In Israel, it's the old hegemony that see themselves as the legitimate heir of Mapai, of the Labor Party.
This is Ashkenazi
Jews, okay, secular Ashkenazi Jews, okay. Not all of them, but mostly, okay, with the Arab minority and with the coalition of the New Israel Fund, okay, which are the woke ideology that entered Israel and exists in Haaretz, in the Israeli academia, in some of the civil society of Israel, okay? So I would say this is the left. So basically, the best way to distinguish between right and left in Israel is to ask someone to define himself, are you more for the Jewish character of Israel, or are you more for the democratic character of Israel? Democratic basically means more liberal, more secular. I would say that now the left, when they pray, they call for liberal democracy. First, they are not liberal, some of them. They are woke. They try to repress free speech. Some of them try to close Channel 14. That's against free speech. And of course, they are not Democrat because they don't believe in the idea that it's the people's sovereignty and not the judges who are the sovereign. So I would say it's a class definition, and it's also a question about how important is the Jewish state for you.
And that also has to do with the people where they have come from. The Ashkenazic Jews came from Western Europe. The Mizrahi or Sephardic Jews, which are now well in the majority in Israel, having lived in Arab countries, many of them oppressed there, have come here knowing what's out there. And therefore, this idea that we have to give quote, Palestinians, end quote, land, based on the fact of what they are claiming, the Mizrahi Jews, the majority say, especially after October 7th, not a chance, not a chance.
Yeah, I would say that the political right in Israel is composed of three distinct social groups. First, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox. They are more than 12%, and in the next generation, they are almost quarter of the population, okay? They are very rapidly increase their number. The religious Jews, the kippot, sugot, and Sephardic Jews that mostly vote for the Likud party. It's the People Party of Israel. And 70% of Sephardic Jews, Mizrahi Jews, are right-winger. But they are not extreme. The tradition of Sephardic Jews is very moderate. They also don't define themselves as a social group. For example, when woke, radical Mizrahi Jews who come to American university, they try to bring the woke ideology of oppressor to the Mizrahi Jews. The Mizrahi Jews don't understand what they're speaking about. There is no oppressor, intersectionality. There is the Am Yisrael, okay? One people, one nation, we are all together, we need to compromise. They are very much for compromise. And it's also part of the religious tradition of the Jews that lived in North Africa. You know, the ultra-Orthodox is a reaction to the modernity. But the modernity did not reach the Sephardic Jews. Therefore, there was no reaction. This is why they are much more moderate than the Ashkenazi Jews.
I think many of us who went to college in this country were liberal, left, progressive leaning in those days. I know I was. I even voted for Bill Clinton. And that has changed as I see what's going on in this country, what's going on around the world. When you get your first job, when you pay your first taxes, when you have to run a business, that changes from that liberal progressive mindset. And I'm just curious, you were a strong part of the left and part of the Kaplan demonstration group. What changed you? And if you could be brief.
I was not part of Kaplan. I participated in two demonstrations because I thought the attempt of Yariv Levin to capture the Supreme Court by having only the coalition voting and selecting all the judges was too extreme, okay? But I would say two things that changed my position. First, when I saw in my own eyes how arrogant is the old hegemony and the Israeli legal system, the elite, that made me very angry. I realized that they did not really want to reach a compromise. They want the government to fall. And they lie to the people. And the second reason, by the way, I was never a big fan of judicial review. I always supported a more procedural approach. Still, I was very much for civil liberties. I drafted the anti-discrimination law of Israel in 2000, and I'm very proud of it till today. Very proud of it. However, what has changed my ideology was October 7th. Once you see cruelty, once you see such evil, you understand that all your belief about two-state solution, everyone wants peace and to be lovey-dovey, that doesn't fit the Middle East. And you need to be very cautious not to have another October 7th. Therefore, now I oppose a Palestinian state. In the past, before October 7th, I was in favor of that. Now I believe that Israel must be very strong, very aggressive, because in the Middle East you need to exercise and show power in order to survive, and there won't be any moment that we can leave our weapons aside and say, well, we have reached heaven. We won't. So these are my two main shifts in ideology.
Let's just look briefly at Lebanon and the recent agreement with Lebanon. The Lebanese Christians have been begging Israel for annexation and citizenship, actually. Israel is the only stable democracy and the only country capable of protecting protecting minority rights, like the Christians in Lebanon. With this ceasefire, there is no withdrawal from southern Lebanon unless Hezbollah fully disarms. And that could mean, knowing Hezbollah, a permanent security zone there. Comment on that, if you would.
Yeah, I would say that during the last 30 years, Israel has shrinked in terms of territory, and now it is being expanding in terms of territory. We now rule on over more than 70% of the Gaza Strip. In the West Bank, Israel has acted aggressively and expanded its settlements. In Lebanon, we have the security zone, and also in Syria, we control the Mount Hermon, the Syrian part of Mount Hermon. We control some areas next to the Golan Heights. We protect the Druze in the Mount Druze, which is the Bashan in the Bible. And, you know, I have a vision of the promised land from the Euphrates to the river of Egypt. However, don't think that I have turned out to be imperialist. Look at the map. The Kurds sit on the Euphrates. The Druze sit on the Bashan part, the southern part of Syria. And there's a corridor called the David Corridor that connects these two parts next to the Iraqi border. And all the part until the Litani River in southern Lebanon, Ben Gurion thought that this is part of the promised land. And the river of Egypt is not the Nile, it's the river of El Arish, which is very near Gaza Strip. It doesn't mean that Israel has to conquer all these parts, but what I see as a vision is a system of alliances, collaboration between what I call alliances of minorities in Syria that are afraid of Turkey, that are afraid of Chulani, who is a jihadist, he's an Al-Qaeda guy. And when you have a common enemy, you have a common reason to collaborate. So this is the promised land.
Yeah, and Israel did not take this land because we want to, rush in and expand. They took it because when Syria was overthrown, that was territory that could have been used against Israel. No question about that. The next thing I was going to say, I've completely forgotten, but I would say that. Oh, right, I got it. What Netanyahu has done, what Israel has done, when you say alliances, we're talking about incredible advances on that. We have Somaliland, which is this far away from the Houthis. That Horn of Africa, right there across the water, is where the Houthis are. So this alliance with Somaliland, which is much more Western than Somalia,
I want to relate to what you said,
extremely important.
Which is very important. We are now experiencing a crisis in the relationship between Israel and the United States. We see how Trump has turned against us, and we see how J.D. Vance speaks of some of the leaders of the political parties in Israel, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, for example. And I think Netanyahu understands very deeply that we should not give up the United States, okay? Definitely not. This is our prime country that we are allies with. But after Trump, it's going to be much more difficult. You have Mamdani Democrats, and you have maybe J.D. Vance, Tucker Carlson. Let's hope it's going to be Marco Rubio, but who knows, okay? So Israel has now strategically has decided to share the risks and created alliances within the area, especially with India. India is an element, a critical element that is also against China and is much more afraid of Pakistan and Islamism. And we share similar values because they are democracy. So what Netanyahu actually does, he creates a new alliances with India, with the Emirates, with Ethiopia and Somaliland, with Greece and Cyprus against Turkey, and with Azerbaijan. This strategy puts an emphasis on the region itself. I think it's a wise move, and also Germany also collaborates with Israel in this respect.
We'll go to the questions in the audience, but I just want to ask you as a last question, who's after Bibi?
You know, that's the biggest question in Israeli politics today. Some of the argument is that the political prosecution of Netanyahu case is being raised because, you know, Netanyahu didn't fight against the deep state. He respected the judiciary all these years. However, Netanyahu was too strong, too popular, and I think the old hegemony thought that if they put Netanyahu away without a proper leader, they can win the coming election. So, who is going to be after Netanyahu? Now, no one. However, you all are most familiar with the story of Moses, who picked Joshua to be, he actually didn't pick him, God picked him, to be the next leader. The next leader is not a duplication of the previous leader, because Moses led the people of Israel in the desert. Joshua had to conquer Israel. When you select the person that replaces you, don't duplicate yourself. Let's hope that Netanyahu, in the coming government, if he is the prime minister, he would find the right guy or the right girl to serve as the next prime minister of Israel.
Fascinating. Questions, please. Right in.
Thank you. How do all these divisions affect the military?
One of the prime problems was the effect of the protest movement on national security, the army, the calls that were brought about in the summer of 2023 not to volunteer to the army, what is called the Brothers in Arms movement, had a devastating effect. It encourages our enemy to attack because they saw that we are weak from within. And at the day of October 7, there was no Air Force. There was no army. The army was torn from within. And this was a disastrous moment when people were crying, "Where is the Air Force? Where is the army? We are being slaughtered. No one came." By the way, the protest movement decided not to repeat this terrible move. They don't admit that they made a terrible mistake, but they don't repeat this nonsense that they did. That was crazy, crazy.
There were two investigative groups that were formed by the Knesset, by the Prime Minister, to discover how this was able to happen and how the response was so slow. You can get the Israeli Air Force to mobilize and get in the air in less than 2 minutes. How could they not be mobilized that quickly to the south. And the two groups that were investigating this came out with reports which have not been allowed to be released, I believe, by the court.
No, not by the court, and it is confidential by the army. By the way, I must say that I have been sued by over 600,000 shekels for claiming that the brothers in arms and Forum 555 of the pilots, they have responsibility for October 7th, and now this is in court. And when I come back to Israel, it's the first day in court in this, so I'll see them in court.
So this is the kind of polarization and fracture in the land of Israel. David, last question.
With the Orthodox having such control over the Netanyahu government these days, what is the situation with moving Orthodox from Bnei Brak into some kind of automatic public service, either in the country or in the military, as a requirement?
By the way, this is an excellent question. This is one of the issues that tears Israel apart, about the fact that ultra-Orthodox are being exempted from serving in the army. And there were so many petitions to the Israeli Supreme Court. And after October 7th, when some section of the Israeli society had to carry so much burden, people were furious about the ultra-Orthodox. So there was so much pressures to enact a law, and which was kind of compromise between the idea that we should maintain the Torah, that Haredim, ultra-Orthodox that actually study, they won't be serving the army. They won't serve in the army. However, 50% within 3 years, under the law that is being drafted, within 3 years, 50% of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel that do not study in the yeshiva will be enrolled to the army. 3 years, with 50%, 50 within 3 years. And I think, it's very difficult to change the way ultra-Orthodox behave for so many years. And in the left, they want to coerce them, to put them in jail. You cannot put so many people in jail. It's crazy. And I believe that once you would see ultra-Orthodox with uniform in Mea Shearim and in Bnei Brak, this would create legitimation, and you would see more and more ultra-Orthodox want to enroll to the army. I think this is a very important and defining moment in Israeli history. It's not about coercion, it's about a gradual process of integrating within Israeli society and also economy.
This man has a future. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the question, and thank you, Alan, for wonderful Q&A. Thank you.